Hello, I'm Clint Walker, and this is Real Estate Appraiser Secrets. And today we're going to talk about the difference between market value and potential value. So today's question actually was brought to me by another appraiser who asked if I could do a video sort of fleshing out this difference for agents, because the difference between market value and potential value is a source of a lot of conflict. In lender work and in most appraisals, unless it is specified that otherwise, the appraiser is going to work towards a definition of market value. And market value is defined in its most relevant part as the most probable price that a buyer would pay for the property. And really, that most probable part is the crux of it, okay? That's really the biggest difference between market value and potential value. Potential value is more along the lines of how we think as listing agents when we are making our listing presentation, thinking about doing what's best for our seller, which is often getting them the maximum they could potentially get for the property, or the highest potential price, to continue with the same semantics. So you can start to see how when you've got appraisers working for the bank and they are working towards determining the most probable price, and you've got listing agents working for a seller who are often focused on the highest potential price, these two things don't match up. And in practical terms, the way that works out on the appraisal side is, an appraisal report more often than not does not just come down to one sale, okay? The lenders wanted us to include a certain number of sales in the report. They've got their own standards. We like to have as many sales as we can because it all just goes to provide more credibility and more reliability to our opinion of value. So what happens is we do sort of a big picture look at the market and get a bunch of market data and check out market conditions in every report. And then we start to hone in on the really comparable properties. And as we look at those properties and as we adjust them, we come to a range of values at the end. Now, some appraisers really go deep in extracting and attempting to support adjustments for lots of little nuances with these properties. I personally take a different approach and am comfortable with a wider range and not adjusting everything down to a very narrow range, because practically, I think it's probably me having been an agent for a while, I know that buyers don't see it that way. And if my task is to analyze and assess buyer expectations and demands and tolerances, and I know that buyers are sincerely ignorant of costs and some of the various dollars and cents aspects to go into these properties, they look at it with a more of a emotional and broader brush view of value. So I personally am of the opinion that it's impossible to derive these tiny adjustments from the market, because the market simply doesn't know how to make them. The market can't do it, and the agents can't report it, then the appraiser can't extract it by looking at the data. Not every appraiser will agree with me on that. A lot of times appraisers look at it as they can pick one dead-on comp and adjust and from that comp extract the differences from other comps and sort of adjust them all to that. It's not right or wrong. If an appraiser can support their adjustments using techniques and data that is up to USPAP and industry standards, then it's fine. I just don't think that the data is that reliable, and so I tend to leave my range a little bit broader. And it's in that range, kind of got off on down a rabbit trail, but the range is the important thing to me, right? And it's the important thing when it comes to market value and potential value. So potential value, well, let's go back. In the range, let's say I've got 10 sales. And let's say it's a house it's a set of houses or a set of sales where values range from $400,000 to $500,000. So, and in those 10 sales, I've got one sale that's 500, one sale that's 400, and 8 that are between, let's say, 440 and 460. Okay? Market value would dictate that when we're considering the most probable price that the house would go for, that the volume of sales appearing in that smaller range, there are 8 sales being within that $20,000 range, the most probable price based on the amount of data showing up in that tight little price range dictates that market value is probably in there somewhere. And even in those 8 sales, maybe there's 5 that are at 450. So now your market value is really starting to look like 450. Simply because of the number of sales in there. The $500,000 sale could be the potential value of the listing, but that could also be an outlier. There could also be an outlier would mean that there is some sort of extenuating circumstance as to why that buyer paid that price for that house, and the appraiser needs to look into that, and we as agents need to look into that too. Maybe that sale has got some sort of elaborate site improvement, or maybe that sale has got a little bit more land or some sort of beneficial view. Maybe that seller gave $40,000 in concessions, right? And so now you're really looking more like what, 460. Same with the $400,000 sale. That sale starts to look like an outlier on the low end. So maybe there's something going on with that. Maybe there's a roof that needs to be replaced, or foundation problems. Maybe it was being sold as a divorce and they were under pressure to get that property liquidated by a court date. That happens. These things, that particular instance doesn't necessarily get advertised in the MLS and can look like any other sale. You got to really dig into that. And your appraiser will attempt to dig into that, because when they start to identify a sale as an outlier. So I want you to sort of have that on your radar, that this difference can be a major problem. And I've seen people argue with appraisers online about this theme. Okay, they don't really understand that they're arguing about the difference between market value and potential value, but the agent has listed it, has done their job, inarguably done their job. They've listed it for max benefit to the seller. They've gotten a buyer, and then the appraiser comes along and appraises it for the most probable value, which is lower than their contract price in this instance. And they get into debating the why and the how. I found my buyer, I did everything right, and why can't you appraise it for this? We got a buyer willing to pay that. And one of the problems there, I guess what the appraiser often says is, look, I'm out here working for the lender. I'm not working for the buyer or the seller. I'm working for the lender to appraise the value of their collateral, and what they want is the most probable price. And these hiccups where the appraised value doesn't meet the contract price in situations like that is not necessarily an indictment on the skill of the listing agent. It's really more of a reality check that the vast majority of us on the agent side are working within an industry that is fueled by our buyers' abilities and our buyers' privilege of getting a mortgage on the property. Okay, so, and I explain, and this is maybe I'll touch on this in a second, but I have the same opinion on how appraisers need to have this perspective as well. But on the agent side, we got to remember that just because we can sell it for this much doesn't necessarily mean that a bank is going to be comfortable lending at that amount, because you may have achieved an outlier price, and they are conservatively minded. They're concerned about their collateral, and they want to know that your buyer is not the only buyer who's going to pay that for it. And the best way to demonstrate that is for the appraiser to give them a value based on the most probable price, which is what many buyers have. They can demonstrate many buyers have paid for it. So it's this conflict or potential conflict is simply one of the potential hurdles or downsides that we have to navigate if we're going to utilize the lending industry for these properties. And we are like this, the combination of our work as agents and the lending industry and appraisers, these all create our our real estate industry that we all benefit from. And you could probably imagine a world where we didn't have an industry as sophisticated and functional as we do now, and how much harder it would make it to sell a house, if everybody had to have so much cash to make the transaction, make the purchase. So bear that distinction in mind. I told you the flip side is that on the appraiser side, I make the same argument that if an appraiser is going to make their living working for lenders, they got to bear in mind that they're choosing to be part of an industry, and being dogmatic about only appraising at the strictly whatever the most number of sales come in at is not wrong by the definition of market value. But as I'll repeat what one of the appraisal commissioners for Tennessee told me and 100 of us in my appraisal trainee classes: if you're appraising on lender transactions, you're not doing real appraising. And that is practically true in many instances. And so I'll never convince an appraiser to budge on that issue, probably, but I think it is the reality of the situation. There's some real ones out there who get it. It's not that they're necessarily number hitters, but they understand that they are choosing to participate in the industry that relies on them. It's actually forced to use us, and because they're forced to use us, they're trying desperately to get away from us, which is bad for us as appraisers, bad for our industry, our profession. So I hope that's helpful. Hope I didn't get off down too many alleyways and side paths there, but just remember, market value, most probable price, potential value is what many of us as listing agents are working on. That is often the highest potential price, and those two things can come into conflict. If you need an appraisal, a pre-listing appraisal, this is a great way for you to get to talk to an appraiser before you deal with that lender appraiser, and we can help you flush out that what the market value is, and in that range what your potential value is, and you can really have a lot of tools with which to advise your client. Plus you get an objective look, plus you get a professional measurement, so you know exactly the size of the house, and potentially avoid some pitfalls on the back end. We can never help you with that. You can find us at appraiserpool.com. We can do professional measurements, appraisals, and consultations. As always, I greatly appreciate you watching the videos, and I'll catch you next time.